thanks to Welcome for their support for this program. We were in the Welcome offices just last week for our team meeting in London, and I have to say, climate is everywhere, data is everywhere, and people are very committed to the success of this program and all that it means for society. So big thanks, and thanks for all four of them for showing up. It looks like we have a lot more funders when we show them twice, so we like to do that. My name is Perry Hewitt. I'm the Chief Marketing and Product Officer for Data.org, and I have the honor to present to you our academic partners. If I can ask my colleagues to come to the stage. Pramath Sinha, Suman Kundu, Ranjan Bose, and Aparna Krishnan. I had the great fortune, thank you, to spend a bulk of my career at Harvard, where I was not an esteemed academic, unlike these people, but I worked on the digital transformation of the university, which included online education. So it's near and dear to my heart, thinking of the important role that academia plays in advancing data for social impact. So we're here today under the aegis of the G20 to talk about the importance of and the potential for data for social impact, and how do we think about how that can mitigate the effects of the climate crisis on human health. Interestingly, they were studied so much in silos until very recently, and I think only now are people beginning to put together the close ties. And in contexts like India and many nations where people are seeing this up close and personal, it's becoming obvious this is a problem we need to work together. And as much as people are in love with technology, right? Like, can you open LinkedIn and not see ChatGPT this week? I don't think so. We know a lot of the problem solutions rest on humans. We need to have people. We need to have people, purpose-driven data practitioners to make this change. And we need them to be nuanced and interdisciplinary in terms of their approach to this work. So I'm going to start big picture. We're here at U Chicago. Thank you, Lenny. Which is an R1 university, and traditionally they're about the creation, preservation, and dissemination of knowledge. They're not in workforce development work, but lately they have been, right? There's been a shift in the last 20 years to say, what is the role they play in terms of being more intentional in workforce development? And so starting perhaps with Professor Bose, if we can talk about workforce development and how you see the role of experiential learning. I know that you have partners with, All India Institute of Medical Sciences, the India Health Fund. How is experiential learning changing what you do at IIT Delhi?
Thank you, and good morning to all of you. It's a pleasure to be here. So coming directly to the question, IIIT Delhi is a research-led teaching institute, and we focus on being industry-facing, globally connected, and most importantly, socially relevant. Now, we believe that experiential learning is a core learning attribute, and we have our courses designed in a manner where a lot of projects are given so that students actually get their hands dirty. So we focus both on the process of learning and the product of learning. That's number one. Number two, we also believe that a lot of learning happens outside the classrooms. So students are encouraged to, carry out undergraduate research, work on internships, take up roles in student clubs, mentorship programs, and many other activities outside the classrooms where they can basically learn in an experiential way, exchange programs. So sometimes we forget that learning happens not only among the teachers and students, but the environment. So it is the process that is very, very important. And finally, I'll also like to add that at the student level, it is the APT framework, the APT. A has to be the active learning part, P has to be the peer-to-peer learning part, which we often neglect, and T has to be the teacher training, which will really have the multiplier effect.
Thank you. No, that move from theory to practice was seen as a dirty word in a lot of higher ed institutions as recently as 20 years ago. But Ashoka started relatively recently and has risen in prominence and is a huge brand, particularly in the United States, where it's almost the first university people mention. So I'm really curious, how have you incorporated experiential learning from the beginning?
Thank you, Perry. And I do want to say that we feel very privileged to be part of this as the youngest in this group, including JPAL. So thank you for selecting us. I would confess that we have some infiltrators in your organization. So both Priyank and Shivam came from the Young India Fellowship Program. I think, Perry, for us, being a new institution, we've always taken the approach of pushing the boundaries and trying to see what can we do beyond what people are already doing. And I would say that there are three areas in which we have made an extra effort. The first is that we've tried to bring in experiential learning as a core element of the program. So our Young India Fellowship program, which we started with, for the entire year, people have to work on an experiential project. So indeed, as all of you walked in, the volunteers who were signing you in are all from our current students who are doing an ELM project, as we call it. We call it the Experiential Learning Module with data.org. The second aspect of what we are doing is that even though we are a liberal arts university and want to be an R1 over time, most people don't associate experiential learning with humanities, social sciences, and so on. So I think what we are trying to do is challenge that and say that even if you're studying history or political science, there's stuff you can do. So for example, we launched a Center for Political Data as one of our first centers at Ashoka. And what we did was we collect election data and based on that do analysis with historians, anthropologists, economists, and of course political scientists. So taking an approach to say, how do you bring data into the humanities and social sciences has been a very big picture. And the last thing I'll say is that we've brought in a lot of practitioners to teach at Ashoka. And that has also brought in an element of this experiential learning, even if it's vicarious. So for example, one of our teachers is here, Shantanu takes his students out into the market to understand what's happening on the ground, even as part of his class, because he comes from a corporate background and has done this kind of work before. So those are some of the elements. The last thing I'll say is that for us in India, not tying outcomes and workplace outcomes, even if you are an R1 university, is not an option. You can't just be an ivory tower university. You have to build capacity and ensure outcomes.
No, I agree, and I think that move from theory to practice, and not at the cost of theory, has been a big shift in higher ed globally. But moving to you, Professor Kundu, I know you come from a very technical university. My next question is about how does education shift when we move from for practice to a for purpose setting? When we say we're not only looking to create data scientists, data analysts, data practitioners, but what does it mean for them to be purpose-driven? And how does that change the way you might teach or train them around collaboration or around interdisciplinarity?
Yeah, thank you, Perry, for inviting us and taking us along as partners with you. Thank Data.org and University of Chicago Center for doing this and taking this forward in the area of climate science and health, climate change and health. As Ashoka probably is the youngest, but probably we are the eldest, and we have infiltrators as well in data church. Priyank is one of our graduates, and we have been a premier.
I'm a little concerned about this. Is there anyone here who does not know Priyank?
Yeah, we have been in the science and technology space since 1964 with the first campus that came up in Pilani. Subsequently, we have brought up campuses in Dubai, Hyderabad, and Goa. And one campus is being established in Mumbai right now to cater to management and law. So going by the definition of R1 University, and of course we are an institute of eminence, you have asked me a different question, but bringing myself the first question that relate to, we have always been into creating workforce. Or if you look at how our courses are designed and how we bring in experiential learning, and practice is not a dirty word for us for last 4 decades or so. One of an important aspect of our curriculum is what we call practice school. That's how it is called. And twice in their curriculum, students go out in the industry. The classroom is transferred to industry, and they work first time for 8 weeks and second time for 22 weeks straight in industry. They're not on campus, then work on real life problems and solve real life problems. And we hope that data science for climate and health will be added to that. We also emphasize lifelong learning, and we have another very unique program which is called Work Integrated Learning Program, or WILP, which has been running from years. We have 35,000 students in that program, where our work professionals are trained in several emerging areas of science, which could be artificial intelligence, which could be machine learning. And one of the two programs that we are offering now as part of partnership with data.org is a certificate program which we wish to bring through WILP, and the other is data science minor in data science for health and climate. And we think technology is very important to drive this as well. So we hope to focus on digital health as an important aspect that could mitigate climate change. And we hope to train not only students, faculties, non-teaching staff. We constantly have this training programs, and where we train all sets of stakeholders in various areas. And because we are strong in data science technology, we hope that we can contribute very well in this area. For example, greenhouse gas emissions, for example, health emission.
How does that training look or feel different? Does it look or feel any different if you're thinking about a purpose-led from the traditional
Yes.
data science?
So in some ways, we have always had a purpose-driven, but now now that it is going to be a purpose-driven training that we are going to impart, interdisciplinarity is going to be a big area, and as Ashoka has rightly mentioned, being a liberal science, we are going from a science and technology institute into that space as well. We have well-developed departments of humanities and social sciences, where climate change is a big one now. And we hope to take this deep in the community and collaborate with other universities. We have two partners here already, and as I was telling someone, we need to take to other bigger universities like University of Delhi, where a lot of. We wish to also take it to school and college levels. We already started one program which is called Young Entrepreneurship Bootcamp Program. So we want to bring climate sense, climate change and environment also in there. Take it to college. We have, and locally. We need to think locally while having a global picture as well, and take collaborations and take this forward.
Thank you. Now, we hear a lot about the power of partnerships. How do we collaborate in order to make things happen? And of course, Aparna, your work is all about partnerships. How do you inform policy with scientific evidence to fight poverty? But how do you get there? How do you get people to work together? How do you get curricula to match up? Any tips you can share to make this effective?
Yes, thank you for that, Perry. We're very happy to be here. At the core of JPAL, as many of you know, we are a network of researchers, of about 600 and more researchers around the world from 100 universities. And what is really exciting for us is that a growing number of these researchers are based in universities in India. There are over 100 researchers who do projects with JPAL in India. And we have people placed at Ashoka and other universities. So this moment, we're very glad to deepen our partnerships with our partners here. And we very much look forward to it. What we do at JPAL, we often say that we work exactly at the intersection of academia, research, policy, and practice. And what does that mean? It's a lot of hard work. It takes a long time and a lot of patience. So to give you an example that brings together all of the points that we were just discussing, one of our recent studies that was completed by Professor Michael Greenstone at UChicago and his collaborators Rohini Pandey, Anant Sudarshan, and Nick Ryan looked at the issue of increasing air pollution and the impact on health and life expectancy. The solutions for this could be many, but looking at a regulatory example was the design of what we think is perhaps the first emissions trading market for particulate matter that was tried in India with the state government of Gujarat. I remember the first conversation about this project was perhaps 10 years ago when we started working with the regulator to understand what could be done, how should we design a program. And so what we do as part of the research process or evidence-based decision-making process is co-create the ideas with all the relevant stakeholders. So in order to understand the needs and the challenges faced by the most vulnerable communities in a region, we work with civil society, we undertake surveys with beneficiaries to map out what the problems are. To design the solutions, for instance, in this emissions trading scheme, we worked with the regulator, which is a pollution control board, to understand how a cap and trade mechanism could be designed. We had to work with a commodity exchange platform that would provide the data and provide the platform for trading. We had to work with the industrial units that had to implement monitoring systems. We had to work with a bunch of engineers to make sure that the tech and the data gives us real-time data on pollution emissions from stacks of industrial units. And there was a large research team that was a combination of engineering, economics, policy, and law, because ultimately we needed the legal mechanism to make the cap and trade program possible. And so what the evaluation does through this process is really engage at every step with each of the stakeholders, aligned to one common goal of use of data and research for social good. And ultimately what we're looking at is the impacts on the people who are most affected, health outcomes, as well as cost of compliance for the industries and for the regulator. And they're all tied together by this one goal of how do we design interventions, evaluate them, and test the cost effectiveness of the same. And that's where we think the power of partnerships comes in, is when you come together to try a problem, and oftentimes it's an iterative process, so we learn, correct from it, design it better, and then test it again. And what we've also realized over the last 2 decades is that the work doesn't end with the completion of a study or the publication of a paper. There is much further work to be done after that in disseminating that information, working with policy partners who could adopt it and take it to scale. And so that process continues where we embed data and research through the entire decision life cycle, as we call it. And so what this provides through the fellowships, and why we're very excited about this program, is the students who would be trained by these excellent universities would have this complementary experiential program through apprenticeships and through fellowships, where you learn to apply the skills of data science, skills of economics, skills of different domains in climate and health, to solving real-world challenges faced by communities and faced by social impact practitioners.
Great, thank you so much. So to me, the incentives for students are really clear there, right? You have these amazing universities, you're going to learn how to do a job in addition to having really robust academic background you can put on LinkedIn and talk to people about. But Ranjan, if I may, how do we begin to think about the incentives for faculty? You said it doesn't stop with publishing a paper. Where I come from, you're done when you publish the paper. How do you make sure that there are incentives for faculty to engage in this kind of teaching and learning?
Great question. So there's a how and a why to this question. So first of all, we need to be very clear why we want to do it. Because for some faculty, you publish and publish or perish, right? Yes. But here, I think the question that is being asked is, what is the real purpose of science and technology? See, science must continue to ask consequential questions. And technology, COVID has shown us, matters only if it can improve human lives. And if we put this perspective back to the faculty, then the life is beyond publishing papers. So first, the why has to come. Not only for the faculty, for the students. Tomorrow you'll ask the same question. Why should a student not take a high-paying job and work at the intersection of public health and climate? And the why has to be very clear. That is number one. So we need to rattle the cage. Right? Keep our peripheral vision open, put a toe in the water, and then make a long-term laser-focused vision. Now I come to the how part. So I think there are 3 clear parts to it. And they're actually the 3 C's. First has to be collaboration. And collaboration between faculties, between students, and between groups of researchers. Number 2C has to be community. This is all about an ecosystem. It is not about a one person or a one organization thing. If we have to make this happen, it has to be through a community to leverage complementary skills. And the third C, of course, is capital. Money makes the mayor go. And so, if you don't have the money or prioritize, we have a battle strategy ready.
Great. Thanks so much. Do you have anything to add, Pramath, from the perspective of Ashoka, how you incent faculty to engage in the more experiential? I mean, from a liberal arts university, I think you're always going to try and tie to meaning. But is there any special lens you think Ashoka brings here?
I think the special lens we bring is to just bring in high-quality faculty. Mm-hmm. Having been an academic once, I feel like you can't tell them what to do.
I've learned that lesson the hard way.
Right. But I just met with my PhD advisor who's 90, and she's still curious. She's still working on problems. And I think if we can marry the problems that faculty are interested in with some of the interests of the big problems that we face as a country, and bring in capital. I think what we have been able to do is leverage access to philanthropic capital in this country and combine that with the interests of faculty. And I can talk more about that, but I saw the sign for 10 minutes. Right?
No, thank you so much. Anything to add, Suman?
These are philosophical, things that they have addressed. I think we need to also bring pragmatic, realistic,
Hey, they said capital.
Capital is one, that is what I meant, is incentives.
Yeah.
Can provide them incentives. See, why do we worry about publication so much? As he said, publish or perish, because it is linked to your career advancement,
Yeah.
and it is linked to how you are perceived in and what your social standing is. If you bring in other kinds of incentives into that mode or mechanism of career advancement, like if you have done a bit of community work, if you have your research which is purpose driven and which happens on our campus as well, I know I can cite some, and that may drive them to such a holistic value to them. If that is understood, I think they will surely contribute much more.
No, I know Aparna in the U.S., you're housed at MIT, and obviously you have these amazing universities here you have the privilege to work with. How do you sort of offer the incentives, or what's the allure of the projects you can bring to a faculty member? Where do you see a common theme and sort of getting them to engage?
Yes, I think to add to everything that's been said, we're focusing a lot on engaging researchers based in universities in India, faculty that we work with. We are very closely connected to Kriya University, but we're hosted in the same ecosystem. And we've been having an India Scholars, India Research program that brings together this climate for engaging in research for good. So the incentives to me, in some sense, I think they all exist within faculty to engage in research, for innovations to happen. But what JPAL helps provide is really the workforce that can make these projects happen at scale and be able to sustain them.
Almost like the human laboratory.
Exactly. So the infrastructure for conducting the research, the connections to work with partners. We have an extensive network of government and nonprofit and private partners we work with. So all of the enabling hard work and the investment that has to go in upfront is being done by the organizational setup. And then what you then create this atmosphere for is to design, test innovations, and then also see that translate into practice. So being able to create that ecosystem in some ways and support the undertaking of research projects through funding, through talent, ties all of this together.
And I don't want to underplay how hard that is, right? Like to find social impact partners that can stay the course with you, do the work with you together. Suman?
So just to add to that, for example, one of the policies we have taken, we will now allow both faculties and students, say, a year off, a longer time off from their teaching and other duties, if they have a startup, in a certain area that they want to develop. So if you tie this now with climate change and health, that's one kind of incentive that will drive them, out of their labs to go do social good. So that kind of policies probably will help as well.
As we all pivot as a society in that area. So this is my first time in India, so I can't break out any Hindi for you. I apologize. But I have been doing some homework, and the Yale program on climate change communication did a big study on India and Indians' activities and sort of reactions and attitudes toward climate change, and said 82% of Indians surveyed either were alarmed or concerned about global warming, and supported, and more to the point, supported doing something about it, said we're going to do something about policy change. And it's a wonderful report. If you hadn't read it, it came out about a week ago. But it really showed a groundswell of understanding and support. And you don't have to. I mean, we were in Nigeria with my colleague Gui in January, and people said, you don't have to explain climate change. Just go to the north, see what's going on. And I feel like in India, with the heat waves of 2022, and the economic growth impact of the economic impact of the growing seasons being so impaired by climate change. It's not some theoretical feel-good exercise. It's very, very immediate and very clear. So that said, we're honored to be doing this work in India. It's obviously the most populous country now, the largest democracy in the world, and with this disproportionate experience of climate change. What is unique about the Indian context, whether that's the educational system or any other cultural aspects that we should bear in mind Data.org is building this global capacity accelerator network with the University of Chicago in Chicago, with focused on financial inclusion, working in Africa, also focused on climate and health. And given that, what does India, if you will, bring to the table that's unique and special? I think about the size, the education, the immediacy, but what else from each of your perspectives, perhaps starting with you, Pramath, does India bring to this important area of data for climate change?
So, Perry, I'm biased, and that's because of where I come from, but I think the ability to set up institutions from scratch allows you to become much more engaged with some of the complexities of the problem and therefore create more multidisciplinary approaches. That's what I think Ashoka's strength is, for example, where traditionally universities and institutions have been very siloed. And if you start from scratch, then you don't have that legacy. And so it's important that we take advantage of that and don't fall back into the legacy of creating silos and start with a very highly multidisciplinary approach, which, as we have all said, is what is required for the future. So I think you have a leapfrog opportunity in terms of the new institutions and the kind of work that we do here in India, where I think you can take on these challenges much more. I think the only other context I'll bring out is that there is a large skilled base of talent, but without any biases to say that this is a technically oriented base. So getting them to buy into this whole data idea and use data for insights and for impact is something that comes naturally and intuitively, I think. I don't mean to say this in a racist sense, but really that we do have that.
There's a cultural norm around that, and that really creates an atmosphere. Now, I also think the entrepreneurship, right? The element of entrepreneurship that lets you start up that institution and people are receptive to a new one.
Yeah, and we are going to create tens of institutions every year over the next 30 years in this country. So that's the opportunity.
Aparna?
I think what's unique in some ways is the diversity you see in this country. So on the one hand, we have emissions trading market schemes for industries. On the other hand, we're also testing informational interventions to small farmers in Odisha or looking at improving child and nutritional outcomes. And so what this means is that we have, on one side, very data mature, high-tech innovations being tested, but it has to work across multiple contexts. And it has to work for the elderly, it has to work for the very poor and marginalized populations. So that allows this iterative testing and learning, and that lets these lessons to be replicated elsewhere. We have evaluations that were done in India that are now scaled up in Africa. There are things that have been tested in Africa and elsewhere that we're trying in India. So I think taking advantage of this unique opportunity where there is so much going on in terms of data and tech innovations and policy opportunities that are being created, I think that lets us innovate quite a bit and then take those lessons which are actually tested at scale because it serves such a large population in this country.
Thank you. Suman?
I did put my cards on population as well, though it is sometimes looked upon as a deterrent, but that's where I think our strength lies. And the demographic dividend, the large young population who are very bright, and the way our education system is, though we emphasize a lot on experiential learning, which is happening as we go forward, our young population, I would say, very good in theory. So building up new models, solutions for climate change, and health, and how they, reversibly influence each other, come up with those solutions and test. So India could provide a unique testing ground for many of these ideas, which is good for us and for the world.
Thank you. And finally, Ranjan, bringing the perspective of IIT Delhi, which is obviously such a huge and esteemed player in this space.
So I'll answer the question from the impact perspective, because that's where we want to reach. And if you want to have impact, the only way to do it is to have a multiplier effect. And from the Indian perspective, there are two distinct areas where you can have the multiplier effect. One is teacher training, train the trainers. And that's how this data collaboration should work. I mean, we should empower the teachers who can then empower the students. And then we can reach the 1 million mark. And number two, a multiplier effect happens in the entrepreneurial space, where today the common jargon is how to do your own startups. So that's where I think we should really work on to scale it up. So the answer should lie in how we want to create that impact.
Focus on impact and
Yes.
tap that entrepreneurship.
Absolutely.
Great. Well, please join me in thanking our wonderful panelists here today, and congratulations to the three universities.